When the 1619 Project was published by the New York Times, it became an object of both admiration and criticism. The series of essays was named for when African slaves were first taken to these shores, and it places slavery and its legacy at the center of American history. Journalist Nikole Hannah-Jones won a Pulitzer Prize for the project, but also came under criticism for suggesting that the American Revolution itself was fought to preserve slavery. Few people have spent more time researching, thinking, and writing about race in America than Nikole Hannah-Jones, and she joins me now. Nikole, welcome to Meet the Press.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let me just start with this. Describe in your own words what the 1619 Project is and its mission.
The 1619 Project is a book now. It began as a magazine and a special section of the New York Times. And what it is it marks the advent of African slavery in the original 13 colonies. So 1619 is the year the first Africans were sold into slavery in Virginia. And what the project argues through a series of essays is that very little about American life today has been left untouched by the legacy of slavery and the anti-Blackness that developed in order to justify it. So it is trying to place the slavery as an institution, which is one of the oldest institutions in America, really at the center of the story that we tell ourselves about our country, and to explain so much about American life through that lens.
Before I get into some of the larger back and debate about this, the specific on the American Revolution, you have since pulled back on asserting that. What has made you pull back?
I wouldn't say that we pulled back. And in fact, if you read the expanded essay that is now in the book, you'll see that we strengthened the case about the role of slavery in the American Revolution. What we did do with the original text was clarify. So the original sentence said, one of the primary reasons that the colonists decided to declare their independence from Great Britain was to preserve slavery. And what we added were two words, some of. So now it reads, one of the primary reasons that some of the colonists decided to declare their independence from Great Britain was to preserve slavery. So it was just clarifying that we clearly didn't mean all colonists and all colonies, but the case is pretty clear if you look at the scholarship that in Virginia and South Carolina, that protecting slavery was a reason to join a revolution that was started in the northern colonies, but that many southern colonists didn't actually think involved them or needed to.
And I guess that's where there is a debate among historians who say, well, wait a minute, look, this became a coalition of whatever it took to go against the Brits, and the same North-South split that essentially has defined this country even today was there at the American Revolution. You accept that part of it, that the Northerners weren't fighting the revolution to keep slavery. Perhaps some of the southern states used it as a rationale.
Absolutely. And that's what the argument is. It's not saying that in all 13 colonies and all colonists, but certainly Virginians, where at that time nearly half of the population was enslaved, where Lord Dunmore threatened to unleash the enslaved against the colonists if they didn't end their revolutionary efforts, that preserving slavery became a major reason for those reluctant colonists to join the revolution. But Virginia, of course, is one of the most important colonies in the American Revolution. Virginians write our founding documents. A Virginian wrote our Declaration, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our first president. So, yes, there always has been this North-South divide based on the level of dependence that the colonies had on the institution of slavery. But to be clear, I didn't make that up. This is based on historiography of scholars such as Alan Taylor, who's won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, Woody Holton, Benjamin Quarles, Gerald Horne. So there is contention within the field of historiography, but I am not someone who just pulled this out of thin air. Where there is debate, right, the debate is within the field and should not be about the credibility of the project.
Let me ask you this. I think, is America alone here? Or was this, for instance, you look at the Western Hemisphere alone. We can go to Brazil. We know that they had slavery. They didn't abolish slavery until the late 19th century. And I think some of the critiques is, you paint this as a uniquely American issue when, sadly, civilization and slavery went hand in hand for a couple thousand years.
Well, one, no one who actually reads the project can say that the project paints this as slavery as a uniquely American institution, because clearly it doesn't. And the project talks about slavery across the Americas. We don't talk about all of slavery in all of the world, because that expectation is never the expectation of scholarship on the Americas. When we talk about the American Civil War, the expectation isn't that you talk about every civil war in global history. So I don't understand why that's an argument when we talk about American slavery. The truth is, though, that chattel slavery, racialized chattel slavery, was unique to the Americas, that a system that transported 13 million people across the Atlantic Ocean and held them in perpetual bondage for more than 250 years, that was racialized, and where people were turned into commodities that could be bought and sold and traded, and had no rights or privileges within the country, and that this happened in a country that was founded on ideas of individual liberty. Brazil didn't have a constitution that said we are a government of the people, by the people. They didn't begin with a founding document that says we hold these truths to be evident that all men are created equal. Neither did Cuba, neither did Jamaica, but the United States did. So what is unique? No, chattel slavery was not unique to the United States. But what was unique was that we practiced chattel slavery while saying and professing these beliefs in equality and universal rights of men. And that's what this project is trying to do. The 1619 Project, which is very clearly stated, is about slavery in the United States of America. It is not a project about slavery in the world. It is not a project about slavery. It is a project about how does the impact of a country founded on ideals of freedom that engages in chattel slavery, that, by the way, was third to the last of all the countries in the Americas to abolish slavery, and the only one besides Haiti, where enslaved people rose up and overthrew their masters, that required a war to abolish slavery. We are unique in that way, and this is a project looking at the unique impact that slavery has had on the United States.
Look, I think the most healthy part of this project is that it has sparked debate. That's the whole point, and there's nothing healthier than when historians get together. And yes, you know, and if you think about it over time, lots of our historical understandings have changed because there's been new scholarship, because there's been new education. So let me ask you this. Did you intend for the 1619 Project to become public school curriculum, or did you intend it to start a debate to improve the curriculum of how we teach American history?
Well, when I first pitched the project, I simply pitched it as a work of journalism, which it is. I mean, I'm a journalist at the New York Times, and I pitched a project to run as a piece of journalism in the New York Times. Now, some months in, as we were working on the project, we began to talk about that this could be a great learning tool for students. Particularly, we were thinking about the broadsheet that ran in partnership with the National Museum of African American History and Culture that talks about teaches slavery through objects found in that museum. Now, the New York Times has an education division. The New York Times regularly turns its journalism into curriculum, as does the Pulitzer Center, who we ultimately partnered with. They are constantly turning works of journalism into curriculum. It's only become controversial because people have decided to make the 1619 Project controversial. But this is something very normal. Many newspapers discount their newspapers to get journalism into schools. So no, I didn't initially intend it to be part of curriculum, but I don't understand why that's problematic. And frankly, most educators are using it to supplement standard curriculum. No one is replacing the old curriculum with the 1619 Project. And I certainly didn't expect this type of controversy, no.
I think in the last 2 years, a lot of people have come to realize that our teaching of history has been incomplete, to be generous, particularly on, I would say, whether it's Reconstruction. I mean, we sort of talk about glossing over that, or specifically think about the Tulsa Massacre and how so many people have said, I didn't get taught that. I grew up in Miami, Florida. I didn't get taught about Axe Handle Sunday in Jacksonville. When you look at our public schools, 8 in 10 public school teachers are white, yet half of the public school students are students of color. How do we improve that aspect of education in America?
So I don't think that, we should definitely have more Black and Latino educators, because that is what our country looks like. But I don't think you have to be Black or Latino in order to teach a more accurate history. The problem is that our teacher preparation programs are not equipping educators with the knowledge that they need to teach this history better. When you look at the survey by Teaching Tolerance, they found that about half or slightly more than half of American educators say they don't feel equipped to teach about slavery, and they really struggle to teach about slavery. It's kind of ironic that we're seeing these bills being passed, these anti-history laws, to make it more difficult to teach about slavery and racism and our country's long history of racism, when in fact, we have educators who are struggling the opposite way. They're holding mock slave auctions in their classrooms. They're having students do assignments where they have to list the pros and cons of slavery because they really don't know how to teach this very well. And that's because as a country, we have not honestly grappled with the truth about our history. And the history we learn is often about nationalism and patriotism,
right,
but not about telling
Where should
the
that come
unvarnished
from?
truth.
I've thought about this, and I know that if government says this is our history, people are going to say, I'm not letting government historians decide what our history is. This seems to be a real challenge in an open society, is how do we get agreement on this, especially when, parents want to have a Virginia governor's race was arguably decided on the strength of how influential should parents be on curriculum. How do we do this?
Well, I would say the governor's race in Virginia was decided based on the success of a right-wing propaganda campaign that told white parents that they needed to fight against their children being indoctrinated as being called racist. But that was a propaganda campaign. And there are a lot of Black parents in Virginia. There are a lot of Latino parents in Virginia, and they were not being featured in that coverage. And what they wanted for their kids' education, which is more teaching about race, more teaching about the history of racism, seem to have fallen on deaf ears. So I think we should frame that question properly. And I don't really understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught. I'm not a professional educator. I don't have a degree in social studies or science. We send our children to school because we want them to be taught by people who have expertise in the subject area. And that is not my job. When the governor or the candidate said that he didn't think parents should be deciding what's being taught in school, he was panned for that. But that's just the fact. This is why we send our children to school and don't homeschool, because these are the professional educators who have the expertise to teach social studies, to teach history, to teach science, to teach literature. And I think we should leave that to the educators. Yes, you should have some say. But school is not about simply confirming our worldview. Schools should teach us to question. They should teach us how to think, not what to think.
At what age?
And I wouldn't want my child.
Is there an age restriction in your mind?
To a school.
There's this
about teaching what?
Teaching sort of when it comes to teaching our past. There's this, and I think it's just coming basically through a racial lens. But there's this, parents are saying, "Hey, don't make my kid feel guilty," and I know a parent of color is going, "What are you talking about? I've got to teach reality." When do you do it, and how do you do it?
Well, I think you should just think a little bit about your framing. You said parents, and then you said parents of color. So the
white parents and parents of color.
White
fair
parents
point. Yeah.
are not representing. As a matter of fact, white parents are representing fewer than half of all public school parents, and yet they have an outsized voice in this debate. I have a child who, just by watching the news when she was 8 years old, she saw Laquan McDonald, a teenager in Chicago, get shot 16 times by police on CBS in the morning show. And she asked me, why did they kill that boy? So I can't wait to have these conversations with my child. And I don't think that we should be asking what is the appropriate age. I think we should be asking, what are the appropriate conversations at that age? But our children are being raised in a racialized society. They are noticing things. They have questions. And I don't think teaching an accurate rendering of history is about making white children feel guilty. I don't know an educator. I've been covering education for 2 decades. I've never seen a teacher of any race tell a white child, you are responsible for what happened in the past. I just don't think that that's happening. And even all of the people who have claimed that that has happened have not been able to produce a shred of evidence that that's true. I think some students who are white probably walk away from some of these lessons feeling very uncomfortable, as we should. We should be uncomfortable with the hard parts of our past. And a master educator knows how to give those lessons without making students internalize this feelings of racism.
At the end of the day, this politicizing of this, it's clearly been weaponized. You've described it, I think, pretty well on the weaponization of it. Do you think simply time will get us past this? How can we get over this hump?
I don't know, honestly. I'm quite concerned about what's happening in our country because, as you know, my project, which is a work of journalism by the New York Times, is banned by name in Georgia, Florida, in Texas. There are efforts to ban the teaching of this history in Oklahoma and South Dakota, in Tennessee. And when we think about what type of society bans books or bans ideas, that is not a free and tolerant democratic society. That is a society that is veering towards authoritarianism. So unless people who believe in free speech, who believe in our children being intellectually challenged, begin to get organized and speak up, I think we're going into a dark age of repression and suppression of the truth. Really, these laws are paving the way for the taking of other political rights, like voting rights, like women's reproductive rights, like rights for LGBTQ people. So we're going to have to decide what kind of country we want to be.
Nikole Hannah-Jones of the New York Times. Really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us. Thanks for this.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.